Your Honor, I'll defend my dad. Judge Robert Harlan stopped, stared. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. Slow, deliberate, the kind that fills a room and invites everyone else to join. To fend her off, he pointed his gavel directly at her. You're from Oakwood Heights. Your daddy's a convict, and you are a black child who doesn't belong in this building. Get out. The gallery erupted. Someone raised a phone. Others leaned over to whisper, grinning. The clerk looked away, smiling. The girl gripped the railing, white knuckles, dry eyes. She didn't sit down. She just looked at Judge Robert Harlan and started memorizing. Nobody laughed when the moment came again. Nobody smiled. Nobody raised a phone because this time it was Judge Robert Harlan who couldn't speak. At that moment, everyone thought the judge had the final word. They were wrong. Let's begin today's story. Oakwood Heights doesn't appear on any tourist map. It sits on the south side of the city, the side where the streetlights take a while to get fixed, where the grocery store closed down and never came back, where the courthouse downtown is close enough to see from the rooftops, but feels like it belongs to a different world entirely. The people here know that they've always known that they wake up anyway. On any given morning, you'll hear gospel bleeding through a screen door. Kids on bikes cutting corners they've memorized since they were little. Miss Henderson from number 42, sweeping her front steps the same way she has for decades. Slow, deliberate, like cleanliness is the one thing nobody can take from you. The murals on the corner of 5th and Broad are peeling now. Civil rights faces half gone, swallowed by weather and time. But they're still there, still watching. This is the world Jada Thompson grew up in. And this is the world that taught her before she ever opened a law book that the system does not bend for people who look like her. She was slight, quiet in the way that gets mistaken for shyness until she opens her mouth. She wears her hair natural, pulled back when she's working, which is almost always. Her teachers call her intense. Her debate coach calls her terrifying. Her classmates mostly leave her alone, not out of dislike, but because there's something about her focus that makes people feel slightly embarrassed about their own. After school, while other kids head to the parking lot or the corner store, Jada goes to the library. Not the school section, the back corner. The one with the legal reference books that nobody touches because they're dense and dry and written in a language that feels deliberately designed to exclude people who didn't go to the right schools. Jada has been teaching herself that language. Her corkboard at home is color-coded. Red for trial transcripts, blue for case law, yellow for anything involving the name Judge Robert Harlan. There's a worn paperback on the corner of her desk, Gideon's Trumpet, the spine cracked from reading, and there's a black notebook, small enough to fit in her jacket pocket, where she writes in her neat, careful hand, things Judge Robert Harlan said, things Judge Robert Harlan did, things Judge Robert Harlan doesn't know she knows. She hasn't shown that notebook to anyone, not yet. When her father was convicted, Leon Thompson was a man who coached Little League on Saturdays and made his daughter's lunch every morning before she woke up. Turkey on wheat, crust cut off, a note tucked inside the bag. Every single day. He was also, according to the state of Oakwood, a criminal. The charge, armed robbery of a convenience store on the highway late on a Tuesday night. The evidence, a grainy security camera that showed a black man in a dark jacket and one witness, a man named Gary Mitchell, who told the jury he recognized Leon Thompson standing behind that counter with a weapon. That was enough. The trial lasted a few days. The jury deliberated for a short time. Leon has maintained his innocence every single day since. Here is what the jury never knew. What Leon's lawyer never knew, what nobody in that courtroom was told. Sometime before Gary Mitchell took that witness stand, his own criminal charges, assault, facing some time, were quietly dropped, not because the case fell apart, not because new evidence emerged, because he agreed to do one thing in return. Point at Leon Thompson and say, that's him. A man's freedom traded for another man's conviction. And the paperwork that proved it, signed, initialed, dated, was buried so deep in the prosecutor's files that nobody went looking. Nobody except a girl with a color-coded corkboard and a lot of fury she's learned to keep very, very quiet. Now Leon sits behind scratched plexiglass every visiting Sunday. He looks older than his age. The warmth in his eyes is still there, but it costs him something to show it now. He pressed his hand flat against the glass. Jada pressed hers back. You don't have to keep doing this, baby. I know, Daddy. She didn't look away. I want to. What she didn't say, what she never said out loud because saying it would make it feel like a weight instead of a weapon, was that she was close. That the thing she'd been searching for was no longer a rumor or a feeling or a desperate hope. It existed in writing with a signature on it, and she was going to walk it into Judge Robert Harlan's courtroom. The wall above Jada's desk tells the whole story, not in words, in paper. Motions, appeals, filings, and responses. Each one pinned in chronological order. Each denial stamped in red ink so dark it looks almost angry. She stopped counting the stamps some time ago. The first lawyer took their case pro bono. Young, eager, the kind of man who still believed the system corrected itself when you pushed hard enough. He filed 2 appeals, both denied. On the day he withdrew, he told Denise he was sorry. Said it like he meant it. Denise thanked him, closed the front door, and stood in the hallway for a long time without moving. The second lawyer charged some money, filed 1 motion, misspelled Leon's name twice, stopped returning calls after the denial came through. The money never came back. After that, Denise stopped talking about lawyers. She worked mornings at the hospital laundry, evenings at a call center across town. On nights she came home late. She'd find Jada still at the desk, still reading, highlighter in hand. She'd set a plate of food down without a word. Jada would eat without looking up. They had an understanding, the kind that forms between people who love each other too much to say out loud how scared they both are. One morning, Jada came downstairs early and found her mother at the kitchen table. Bills spread out, coffee gone cold. Denise heard her on the stairs and looked up. And for just a half second before the smile came, Jada saw her mother's real face, exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You sleep? Denise asked. Enough, Jada said. That means no. They ate breakfast together in the kind of silence that belongs to people carrying the same weight from opposite ends. Jada noticed the envelope half tucked under the electric bill. Past due. Red lettering visible even upside down. She didn't say anything. Neither did Denise. Michael Cole was the third lawyer. He hadn't charged them anything, which Jada respected. Public defender, many open cases. The permanent look of a man running slightly behind on everything. But he was honest, and honest, she'd learned, was rarer than it should be. She spread her files across his desk one afternoon. The transcripts, the case law, months of research. Cole looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. Jada, I admire what you're doing, but the law isn't a debate competition. I know, she said. Debate competitions. I've already won. He almost smiled. He picked up the trial transcript, tapped Gary Mitchell's name. Even if there was a deal, even if it was hidden, you need proof that meets a legal standard. A feeling isn't a Brady violation. I know what a Brady violation is, Jada said. Cole looked at her over his glasses. I know you do. That's what worries me. He set the transcript down, folded his hands. There was something he was circling. She could feel it. What? She asked. You know, Judge Robert Harlan sat on the appellate panel for Whitmore versus Baines, wrote the majority opinion himself. Prosecutorial suppression of witness agreements. Reversible error, full stop. Strong ruling. Progressive even for this circuit. He paused. But since then, he's been quietly ignoring it. Cases that should have triggered that precedent. Cases with defendants who looked like your father denied at the habeas stage every time. Nobody's connected the dots publicly. Another pause. I'm not sure anyone's tried. Jada was already writing in the black notebook. What Cole didn't know was that she'd filed a public records request some time earlier. Routine, administrative, the kind that gets processed slowly and forgotten. Some time ago, a manila envelope arrived in the mail. She opened it alone at the kitchen table while Denise was at work. Inside, a handwritten memo dated before Mitchell testified, initialed by Frank Whitfield. Deal confirmed. Keep off record per standard. She held it under the kitchen light for a long time. Her hand wasn't shaking. She'd been preparing for this moment too long to let her hand shake. But there was something else on that memo. A distribution list. 4 names. 3 she expected. The 4th stopped her cold. Judge Robert Harlan's chambers. She thought about her father's hand pressed against the plexiglass. She thought about the time the jury took to end his life. She thought about the red stamps, the lawyer who misspelled his name, her mother's face in the early morning. Then she thought about Judge Robert Harlan waving his hand like brushing away a fly. The next day, she went to the courthouse, stood in the public corridor, listened to Judge Robert Harlan's clerk near the water fountain. The habeas petition, Leon's last legal option, had been assigned to Judge Robert Harlan's docket. Hearing soon, and Judge Robert Harlan had already told his staff. Quick denial. He hadn't read the file. Didn't feel the need. If denied, Leon's next opportunity for legal relief was far away. She walked home several blocks, didn't take the bus. By the time she reached her front door, something had settled in her chest, not anger. She'd had anger for a long time, and anger alone hadn't been enough. Something colder, something with edges. She went upstairs, opened the black notebook, wrote 1 line at the top of a fresh page. He hasn't read the file. That's his first mistake. Then she picked up her phone and called Patricia Marsh. All right. I'm going to be real with you for a second. When I first heard this story, I almost checked out. Like, it was so obviously unfair. It just felt heavy to even think about. But then this thought hit me. What if that was your dad behind that glass, and you're a young kid, and suddenly you realize you're the only one left who can do anything? So, yeah, be honest. What would you do? Patricia Marsh doesn't have a fancy office. She runs a legal literacy class out of a church. Basement on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Folding chairs, a whiteboard with a cracked corner. Bad lighting that flickers when the heat kicks on. The people who show up are mostly working class, mostly black. Mostly people who've had some version of the same experience. They needed the law, and the law didn't show up for them. Patricia had argued before the Supreme Court years ago, lost by 1 vote. She'd spent the time since making sure that loss meant something. When Jada walked in that evening with a manila folder thick, Patricia was erasing the whiteboard. She didn't turn around. Class ended an hour ago. I'm not here for class, Jada said. Patricia turned, looked at her, looked at the folder. Then she pulled a chair from the nearest stack and sat down. Show me. Jada laid it out piece by piece. The trial transcript, the Mitchell testimony, the public records memo, the distribution list with Judge Robert Harlan's name on it, the Whitmore versus Baines opinion. Judge Robert Harlan's own words highlighted in yellow. She didn't rush. She'd rehearsed this in her head so many times that it came out clean and sequenced, like something she'd been building toward her whole life. Patricia didn't interrupt, didn't react, just read. When she finished, she sat the last page down and looked at Jada for a long moment. Who helped you build this? Nobody. Patricia was quiet. Then she said, "Say that again." Nobody. Jada repeated, "Just me." Patricia picked up the Whitmore opinion, read the highlighted section again, set it back down. You know what you're doing here. You're not just filing a habeas petition. You're accusing a sitting judge of misconduct. A man with decades on the bench, political connections, and absolutely no reason to make this easy for you. I know if this goes wrong, it won't. Patricia looked at her for another long moment. Then something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly, recognition. You ever done moot court? I've won state debate championships. That's not what I ask. Then, no, Jada said, but I'm ready to start. What followed was the hardest stretch of Jada's life, and she had a high bar for that. Patricia didn't go easy on her. She wasn't the kind of woman who believed in going easy. Every morning before school, Jada would sit across from Patricia at that church basement table, and Patricia would fire questions like she was trying to find the exact spot where Jada would break. Case citations, procedural rules, hypothetical objections, counter-arguments. Judge Robert Harlan might use counter-arguments to the counter-arguments. He'll try to cut you off, Patricia said one morning. Don't let him. How do I stop a judge from cutting me off in his own courtroom? You keep talking calmly like you didn't hear the interruption. He can hold you in contempt or he can let you finish. Either way, you don't stop. Jada wrote that down. The kitchen table at home became a second workspace. After dinner, after Denise went to bed, she'd spread everything out under the overhead light and work until her eyes burned. The corkboard evolved. New sections, new colors, new connections drawn in red marker between facts she'd previously kept separate. She started to see it the way you see a proof in mathematics, each piece depending on the others, the whole thing standing or falling together. One night, she found the Whitmore versus Baines case again. Not just the ruling itself, but the full appellate record. And buried in a footnote on page 43 was something that made her sit up straight. The case had involved a defendant named Thomas Baines, black man, mid-30s, convicted on testimony from a witness who'd had charges dropped sometime prior. Sound familiar? Judge Robert Harlan had written that the suppression of that deal was not just procedural error. It was, in his words, a fundamental betrayal of the court's integrity. His words, his opinion, his standard applied to a case that looked almost identical to her father's. She circled it 3 times. Then she wrote in the margin, "He set the trap himself." She also found Gary Mitchell. It took weeks of cross-referencing public records, old addresses, utility registrations, a name on a community center sign-in sheet. He'd moved twice since the trial, but he hadn't disappeared. Patricia drove. Jada sat in the passenger seat with the folder on her lap, looking out the window. You don't have to do the talking, Patricia said. I can. No, Jada said. This one has to be me. Patricia nodded, didn't argue, pulled up to the curb and put the car in park. I'll be here, she said. Jada got out. She rang the bell, waited. The door opened and Gary Mitchell stood there, older than his photo, heavier, with the particular look of a man who hasn't slept cleanly in a long time. His eyes went to her face, then to the folder under her arm, then back to her face. "I wondered when someone would come," he said. "Then you know why I'm here," she said. She didn't go inside for long. When she came back to the car, Patricia looked at her. "He sign it?" Jada held up the folder. The last thing she did the night before the hearing was iron her clothes. She didn't need to. She'd already laid them out, already checked them twice, but she did it anyway. Standing in the quiet of the kitchen at midnight, the iron moving slow and deliberate across the fabric, her mother appeared in the doorway. "You scared?" Denise asked. "Yes," Jada said. "Good means you know what's at stake." Jada set the iron down. She looked at the clothes hanging on the chair, pressed, ready, the way her mother had pressed her dress the morning of her father's trial, when she was still just the girl in the gallery. She went upstairs. She pinned one last note to the corkboard. It said, "He laughed. Remember that." Then she turned off the light. Sometime before the hearing, Patricia cleared her dining room table completely. No dishes, no mail, no anything. Just the table, the overhead light, and everything Jada had built spread out in front of them. They'd been over it a dozen times by now. But this time, Patricia went slower, picked up each document separately, read it the way a judge would read it, looking for holes, looking for the places where the argument could be attacked and dismantled before it ever got off the ground. She picked up the public records memo, read it again, set it down, picked it up again. "This distribution list," she said. "I know," Jada said. "His chambers are on it. I know." Patricia set the memo flat on the table and put her finger on the fourth name. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Here is what that name meant, what it meant in plain language, stripped of all the legal terminology and procedural complexity. Frank Whitfield had written a memo confirming a secret deal with his star witness, a deal that by law he was required to disclose to the defense. He didn't disclose it. He buried it. That alone was a Brady violation. The kind that gets convictions overturned, the kind that ends prosecutorial careers. But Whitfield hadn't kept that memo to himself. He'd sent it to Judge Robert Harlan's chambers, which meant one of two things. Either Judge Robert Harlan never read it, possible, plausible, the kind of administrative oversight that happens in busy courthouses every day, or Judge Robert Harlan read it, understood what it meant, and let the trial proceed anyway. Let an innocent man get convicted on testimony he knew was bought and paid for. The first possibility was negligence. The second was something that had a much harder name. "If we bring this into that courtroom," Patricia said, "we're not just arguing for a new trial." "I know," Jada said. "We're ending his career." Jada looked at the memo at the fourth name on the distribution list. She thought about her father's hand against the plexiglass. She thought about the time the jury took. "He ended my father's life." She said, "We're even." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once and moved on. They had 3 arguments, clean, sequential, each one building on the last. First, the Brady violation. The memo proved the deal existed. Mitchell's signed affidavit confirmed it. The defense was never told. That alone was grounds for a new trial. Second, Judge Robert Harlan's own precedent. In Whitmore v. Baines, he'd written that suppressing witness agreements was a fundamental betrayal of the court's integrity. His words, his standard, applied to a case that looked almost identical to Leon Thompson's. Same structure, same concealment, Same result. If the precedent applied then, it applied now. Unless, of course, it only applied to certain defendants. Third, the distribution list. Judge Robert Harlan's name. The question of what he knew and when he knew it. 3 arguments, 3 arrows, and Jada Thompson had spent a long time sharpening every single one. Patricia stacked the documents back into order, squared the edges, set them down. You know what a young girl walking into Judge Robert Harlan's courtroom with this is going to look like, she said. Jada picked up the stack and put it in her folder. Like the last thing he ever expected, she said. Patricia almost smiled. That's exactly right. The Oakwood County Courthouse smells the same every morning. Floor wax and old paper and something underneath both of those things. Something that has no name but feels like the accumulated weight of every decision ever made inside these walls. Good decisions, bad decisions. Decisions that changed lives without the people whose lives were changed ever getting a real say, Jada had been here before. She knew the smell. She walked in early, folder under her arm, wearing the clothes she'd ironed the night before. Michael Cole was already at the defense table arranging papers with the careful focus of a man who knows he's outgunned and is trying not to show it. He looked up when she sat down behind him. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. This young girl with a folder and a corkboard and years of work sitting in her lap. And he nodded slowly like he was trying to borrow some of whatever she had. Leon was brought in through the side door, orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed in front. The sound of the chain between his ankles hitting the floor tiles was the only sound in the room for a moment. He found Jada's face before he found anyone else's. His jaw tightened. Pride and fear and love all at once compressed into a single expression that he couldn't hold for long before he had to look away. She didn't look away. The bailiff called the room to order. The door behind the bench opened. Judge Robert Harlan walked in. He was taller than Jada remembered. Or maybe it was the robe. The way it moved, the authority it carried, the decades of unquestioned power it represented. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, opened the file in front of him. Then his eyes moved across the room in the automatic survey of a man who'd done this countless times. They landed on Cole. Then they moved just slightly, just briefly, to the girl sitting directly behind him. Something crossed Judge Robert Harlan's face quick, gone before most people in the room would have caught it, but Jada caught it. She'd been studying that face for a long time. He recognized her. He looked back down at his file. "We're here on the matter of the Thompson habeas petition," he said. His voice filled the room the way it always did, effortless, practiced, the voice of a man who had never once doubted his right to be the loudest person in any room he entered. "Mr. Cole, you're filing." Cole stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. We're presenting today on 3 grounds: a Brady violation stemming from the original trial, a precedent conflict with this court's own ruling in Whitmore v. Baines, and new evidence in the form of a signed affidavit from the prosecution's original star witness. I've read the filing, Mr. Cole." Judge Robert Harlan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. What I'd like to understand is why it took so many pages to say something that could have been said in far fewer. He glanced toward Jada, then back to Cole. "And perhaps you can explain the nature of your support staff." A quiet ripple of amusement from the prosecution table. Whitfield leaned back in his chair. The particular posture of a man watching a foregone conclusion play out on schedule. "She's my legal research consultant, Your Honor," Cole said steadily. "Your legal research consultant." Judge Robert Harlan repeated the words the way you repeat something a child has said, patient, faintly amused. making sure the room understood the absurdity without him having to name it directly. "How progressive of you." He turned back to the file. "Proceed." Cole proceeded. He laid out the Brady argument cleanly. The memo, the timeline, the failure to disclose. He was a couple of minutes in when Judge Robert Harlan interrupted the first time. A procedural question, technically valid, but timed in a way that broke Cole's rhythm. Cole answered, regrouped, continued. Judge Robert Harlan interrupted again and again, each interruption small enough to be defensible, frequent enough to be suffocating. Jada wrote everything down. Every interruption, every redirect, every moment Judge Robert Harlan checked his watch in the first stretch. She kept her face neutral. She'd practiced this, too. Patricia had spent an entire session teaching her how to sit in a room where someone was trying to make her feel invisible. You don't react. Patricia had said reaction is what they want. You just keep taking notes, because every mistake he makes in that room is a gift, and you don't waste gifts. Then Judge Robert Harlan made his first real mistake. He cited a case, Harris versus Commonwealth. He said 1994 to dismiss the relevance of the Mitchell timeline. Cole hesitated. Jada didn't. She wrote 4 words on a notepad and slid it forward. Cole read it. His expression didn't change, but his posture did. A small straightening, a breath. Your Honor, with respect, Harris versus Commonwealth was overturned later. Harmon versus State. The precedent no longer holds. The room went very quiet. Judge Robert Harlan's pen stopped moving. He looked at the notepad in Cole's hand. Then he looked at Jada. His expression was unreadable, but his pen was still not moving. Where did that come from, Counselor? My research consultant, Your Honor. Judge Robert Harlan set his pen down. Slowly, he folded his hands on the bench and looked at Jada directly for the first time since the session began. And how old are you, young lady? Jada met his eyes without blinking. Old enough to read, Your Honor. Nobody laughed this time. Judge Robert Harlan's face went flat. He straightened in his chair. When he spoke again, his voice was exactly the same. Smooth, controlled, unhurried. But something underneath it had shifted. We'll take a brief recess. When we resume, Mr. Cole, I'll be directing my questions to the attorney of record, not the gallery. He rose. The bailiff called the room to order, and as Judge Robert Harlan disappeared through the door behind the bench, Whitfield leaned across to his assistant and said something low that made the assistant nod. Jada watched them, wrote it down. In the hallway, Whitfield found Cole near the window. You need to pull back, Michael. His voice was quiet, reasonable, the voice of someone offering friendly advice. You know how this ends. Don't let that girl burn your career down. Cole looked at him for a moment. I'm not the one burning anything, he said. Jada stood at the far end of the hallway, looking out at the street below. People walking, cars moving, a city going about its business completely unaware of what was happening on the 4th floor. Her phone buzzed. Patricia, ready? She typed back without hesitating. Born ready. Court resumed soon after. Judge Robert Harlan settled into his chair with the unhurried ease of a man who has never once walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged there. He opened the file, adjusted his glasses, let the silence sit for a moment longer than necessary. The particular silence of someone who understands that making people wait is its own kind of power. Mr. Cole, he said, you have a limited time. Cole stood and Jada watched him do something she hadn't seen him do before. Hesitate just for a second, just long enough to notice. The morning session had cost him something. The interruptions, the redirects, the constant low-level pressure of arguing in front of a man who had already decided the answer before the question was finished. It had gotten under his skin in the way that only sustained deliberate condescension can. He started with the Brady violation. Clean opening. Good structure. But a couple of minutes in, Judge Robert Harlan cut across him. Mr. Cole, the memo you're referencing was obtained through a public records request filed by. He glanced at his notes. A private individual, not by counsel. Walk me through the chain of custody. Cole walked him through it. Judge Robert Harlan listened with the expression of a man who has already formed his opinion and is simply waiting for the other person to finish talking. Then he asked another question, then another, each one technically valid, each one pulling Cole further from his prepared argument and deeper into procedural territory where Judge Robert Harlan held every advantage. Cole answered, regrouped, tried to return to the main thread. Your Honor, the core issue here isn't the method of discovery. It's what the document reveals. A prosecutorial agreement that was legally required to be disclosed to the defense. The document reveals an initial memo. Judge Robert Harlan said, what it reveals beyond that is a matter of interpretation. Yours is one interpretation. I can think of 3 others. He leaned back. Continue. Cole continued, but his rhythm was gone now. That precise, careful structure that Jada had watched him build and rebuild over weeks of preparation. He reached for a citation, stumbled on the year, said 1 year when he meant another. Judge Robert Harlan pounced. Is that your argument, Mr. Cole? Or a rough draft? A sound from the prosecution table. Not quite a laugh. Something worse. The sound of people who are completely comfortable. Cole glanced back at Jada. She was already writing. The note was in his hand before he'd finished turning back around. He read it. Something steadied in his face. He opened his mouth to speak. Judge Robert Harlan raised one hand. Mr. Cole. His voice was still smooth, still patient. The patience of a man who knows he's about to end something. I'm going to stop you there. This court does not accept strategic guidance from unlicensed individuals seated in the gallery. He paused. Let that land. If your case rests on notes passed by a young girl, perhaps it deserves the outcome it's heading toward. He reached for his gavel. Leon closed his eyes. In the gallery, Denise's hand found the strap of her purse and held on. Her knuckles went pale. She didn't make a sound. She just held on. The way you hold on when you've been holding on for a long time, and you've learned that the only alternative is letting go. The gavel rose, and then Jada Thompson stood up. Not loudly, not dramatically. She didn't push her chair back or raise her voice or do anything that could be called a disruption. She simply rose calm, straight, completely still, and somehow the room noticed before she said a single word. The way a room notices when something changes that it can't immediately name. Judge Robert Harlan looked at her. The gavel was still in his hand. Your Honor, her voice was clear and even. Permission to address the court. You are not an attorney, Judge Robert Harlan said. No, sir. She didn't look away. I'm the petitioner's daughter, and under Section 2254, as affirmed in Bounds v. Smith, the petitioner has the right to present arguments on their own behalf before this court. I'm exercising that right on my father's behalf. Dead silence. Judge Robert Harlan didn't move. Whitfield didn't move. The clerk's fingers hovered above the keyboard, motionless. Judge Robert Harlan looked at this young girl standing in his courtroom, citing federal statute from memory. meeting his eyes without flinching. The same girl he'd waved away once before, like she was nothing, like she would always be nothing. His gavel lowered slowly. "You have a limited time," he said. Nobody in that courtroom, not the bailiff, not the prosecutor, not the court reporter, not Judge Robert Harlan himself was ready for what came next. Jada stepped forward. No notes, no folder, not anything except what years of work had put inside her head, organized, indexed, ready. She stood the way Patricia had taught her to stand, feet flat, shoulders back, voice from the chest, not the throat. She began with the Brady violation, not with background, not with context, directly with the violation. Clean, precise, 3 sentences that left no room for interpretation. Gary Mitchell testified that he recognized Leon Thompson at the scene of the robbery. Sometime before that testimony, Mitchell's own assault charges were dropped by the prosecution. That agreement was never disclosed to the defense. Under Brady versus Maryland, that concealment is not a procedural technicality. It is a reversible error. Judge Robert Harlan's pen moved, making notes or appearing to. The signed affidavit from Gary Mitchell, submitted as Exhibit 3, confirms the agreement existed. The internal memo from the prosecution's own files, submitted as Exhibit 2, confirms it was intentionally kept off the record. She paused one beat. Both documents are dated. Both are signed. Neither has been challenged for authenticity. Judge Robert Harlan looked up. The provenance of those documents was established through a public records request. Your Honor filed some time ago, received, stamped, and verified by the county records office. She didn't speed up, didn't slow down. I have the receipt if the court requires it. Judge Robert Harlan said nothing. His pen had stopped. She pivoted. Your Honor, in the Whitmore versus Baines case, you sat on the appellate panel. You authored the majority opinion. And in that opinion, you wrote she didn't look at a single piece of paper. Prosecutorial suppression of material witness agreements constitutes reversible error, irrespective of the weight of remaining evidence. The integrity of the court depends not on outcomes, but on process. When that process is corrupted at its foundation, no verdict built upon it can stand. The room was absolutely still. Those are your words, Your Honor. That is your precedent, established in a case involving a black defendant, a hidden witness agreement, and a conviction that rested almost entirely on that witness's testimony. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. The case before this court today involves a black defendant, a hidden witness agreement, and a conviction that rested almost entirely on that witness's testimony. She looked directly at Judge Robert Harlan. Either your precedent applies or it doesn't. And if it doesn't apply here, this court owes my father an explanation for why something moved through the gallery. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift in pressure. The collective intake of breath from people who have just watched something land that cannot be unlanded. Whitfield stood. Objection. Counsel is not present. This individual has no standing to. She cited Bounds versus Smith. Cole said quietly. She has standing. Judge Robert Harlan looked at Whitfield, then back at Jada. His expression had not changed, but his stillness had. It was a different kind of stillness now, not the stillness of a man in control, the stillness of a man being very careful. Continue, he said. Jada continued. Exhibit 4 is the distribution list from the prosecution's internal memo. 4 names received that document before trial. 3 were members of the prosecution team. She paused. The 4th was this Chambers. Whitfield was on his feet again. Your Honor, I'm not making an accusation, Jada said, her voice unchanged. I'm entering a documented fact into the record. What this court does with that fact is the court's determination. But the fact exists. It is dated. It is signed. And it places this court in receipt of information about a witness agreement that was simultaneously being concealed from the defense. She looked at Judge Robert Harlan one last time. My father has been incarcerated for a crime he did not commit. The evidence that could have prevented his conviction existed before his trial began. It was hidden. And the record now shows that the concealment was not limited to the prosecution's office. One breath. I think this court knows what the right decision is. She stepped back. The record is complete. I yield. Seconds of silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that you can feel against your skin. Then Patricia Marsh, sitting in the back row of the gallery where she'd been since early that morning, exhaled slowly through her nose. Denise Thompson pressed both hands flat against her thighs and stared at the back of her daughter's head. Leon, behind the defendant's table, had his eyes open now. He was looking at his daughter the way you look at something you made that turned out to be far greater than you understood when you made it. Judge Robert Harlan had not moved. He sat with both hands flat on the bench, looking at the space just above Jada's head, as if the argument was still hanging in the air in front of him, and he was trying to find the edge of it. He didn't find one. This court will recess for a break, he said. His voice was the same. Everything else was different. The recess felt like a very long time in a courthouse hallway. Cole sat on a bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, not thinking, just waiting. Everything that could be done had been done. The rest was out of his hands. Denise stood near the window, not looking at the street, looking at Jada, who sat beside Cole, folder on her lap, perfectly still. Patricia stood apart near the stairwell, arms crossed, eyes on the courtroom door. She hadn't spoken since the recess was called. A clock ticked somewhere. Pigeons shifted on the ledge outside. A maintenance worker pushed a cart down the far end of the corridor, wheels squeaking, completely unaware that a short distance away, a family was waiting to find out whether a long time meant anything. Jada looked down at her folder, thought about the note on her corkboard. He laughed. Remember that. She remembered. The courtroom door opened. Leon came through the side entrance. Same jumpsuit, same chain, same sound against the tiles. But this time, when he sat down, he turned and looked at Jada and didn't look away. Held her gaze like he was trying to say something that didn't have words yet. Judge Robert Harlan entered, walked to the bench more slowly than he had that morning, sat down, arranged his papers with deliberate care. But the care felt different now, less like authority, more like what a man does when he needs a moment and doesn't want anyone to see it. He had a handwritten page in front of him, written during the recess, which meant he'd known within minutes what he was gonna do, which meant everything Jada had put in front of him had landed exactly where she'd aimed it. He cleared his throat. This court has reviewed the arguments presented and the documentary evidence submitted during today's proceeding. The court finds sufficient cause to grant an emergency stay of the petitioner's sentence, pending full evidentiary review. The alleged Brady violation, if substantiated, constitutes grounds for a new trial. This matter is referred to the State Attorney General and the Judicial Conduct Commission for independent review. He set the page down. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The people who understood what had just happened felt it move through them quietly. The way relief moves, not like an explosion, like something releasing that has been held too tight for too long. Judge Robert Harlan looked up. His eyes settled briefly, deliberately on Jada. The court acknowledges the quality of the arguments presented today. He didn't say her name. Every person in that room knew exactly who he meant, including Judge Robert Harlan. The bailiff moved toward Leon. The cuffs came off procedurally, temporarily, but off. Leon stood turned around slowly like a man who isn't sure yet that he's allowed to do what he's about to do. He found his daughter's face. This man who had cut the crusts off her sandwiches every morning, who had coached Little League on Saturdays, who had pressed his hand against scratched plexiglass every visiting Sunday for a long time. He looked at her across that room and mouthed 2 words. "My baby." She mouthed back, "I told you." Denise made a sound that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a sob. Something between the two. Something that had been waiting a long time to exist. Patricia caught her, held her steady, chin up, eyes bright. The composed expression of a woman who has spent her whole career waiting for a moment that looked exactly like this one. Outside, the city continued, indifferent, unaware, but in that hallway, walking toward the exit in the late afternoon light, Leon on one side, Denise on the other, Jada between them. A family was putting itself back together, one step at a time. Right then, Jada had one hand in her father's. In her other hand, folded and finished, was everything she'd built. She didn't look back at the courtroom. She was already thinking about what came next. Later, Leon Thompson walked out of Oakwood Correctional, a free man. The full evidentiary review took some time. Gary Mitchell's testimony was formally struck. The secret agreement was confirmed. The conviction was overturned. Frank Whitfield resigned before the Attorney General's investigation concluded. He didn't give a reason publicly. He didn't need to. Judge Robert Harlan retired early. The Judicial Conduct Commission's findings were sealed, but the retirement wasn't. Decades on the bench, and it ended quietly, without ceremony in the middle of a Tuesday. Jada Thompson received acceptance letters from pre-law programs. She deferred all of them. When asked why, she said, "I have high school left, and I'm not done yet." Her corkboard didn't stay empty for long. New names, new files, new cases belonging to people who looked like her father, who had been processed through the same system by the same logic toward the same predetermined destinations. She didn't talk about it much. She just worked the same way she'd always worked, quietly, carefully, with the kind of focus that makes people feel slightly embarrassed about their own. On the first Saturday after Leon came home, he made her lunch. Turkey on wheat, crust cut off, a note tucked inside the bag. She found it at the kitchen table and sat with it for a long time before she opened it. It said, "I always knew." She folded it carefully and put it in the black notebook. Between the case citations and the highlighted precedents and the years of work that had brought them back to this kitchen, this table, this ordinary and extraordinary morning. Then she picked up her highlighter, uncapped it, and started on the next page. "I'm not gonna lie, this story kinda messed with me. We're talking about a young girl. No law degree, no backup, no big team behind her. Just a long time of staying up late and refusing to quit. And then she walks in that room and somehow outthinks everybody there. In the end, this story leaves us with one unforgettable truth. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money, status, or even the law itself. It's a quiet, unbreakable determination born from love. A young girl from Oakwood Heights, armed with nothing but a worn notebook, a color-coded corkboard, and years of silent fury, walked into a courtroom where everyone had already decided her father's fate and changed everything. She reminded us that real courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shows up as a calm voice, steady hands, and a mind that refuses to accept no when justice is on the line. This isn't just about beating the system. It's about what happens when someone refuses to let the people they love be erased. It's about a daughter who looked at her father through scratched plexiglass and promised herself she would bring him home, and then actually did it. That kind of love, that kind of persistence, can move mountains most of us think are immovable. It proves that age doesn't define your power, and background doesn't decide your destiny. If you've ever felt small, overlooked, or powerless against something much bigger than you, remember Jada Thompson. She was just a kid who decided her father's story wasn't over yet. And because she refused to quit, the family got its heart back. If this story touched something deep in you, drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you were standing in that courtroom? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have found the courage to speak? And if you want more stories like this, real stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're just getting started. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter.